There's something I often observe in Americans, especially those living in a pace that's too fast, with too many choices, too many ads, and too much pressure to succeed. They almost always feel like they're missing something. A bigger house, a newer car, a better body, a higher status. And the interesting thing is, the more they want, the more insufficient they feel. Have you ever felt that way? Like you're chasing something without even knowing what it is, only knowing that if you don't reach it, you'll feel left behind. I remember one afternoon, a patient of mine, a successful 38-year-old entrepreneur, walked into my therapy room and sighed as if the whole world were sitting on his shoulders. He said, "I have a home, a car, a good income. I've even achieved many things I once thought were my life goals. But why do I still feel empty?" And then he said something I'll never forget. "I feel like I'm living someone else's life." When I asked him, among all the things you want, which are truly yours, and which belong to someone else, he fell silent for a long moment. That was when the truth surfaced. Many of us are running after things that were never ours to begin with. We want the things society taught us to want. We want what parents, schools, pop culture tell us we should want. But we rarely sit down and ask ourselves, do I genuinely want this? And why? That's why the ancient Stoics emphasized this. The problem isn't desire itself. The problem is desiring the wrong things. They said the freest person isn't the one with countless options, but the one who can look a desire in the eye and say, "I don't need you to be at peace." I want you to imagine this. Imagine you're standing in a giant supermarket. Every aisle is a category of desires: success, money, fame, love, hobbies, possessions. Everything shines, inviting you, as if whispering, "If you have me, your life will be better." But just like in a supermarket, not everything there is something you truly need. Many things are just temporary impulses, or worse, fears of being left behind if you don't have them. One exercise I often ask clients to do, and now I want you to try it tonight. It's very simple. Write down 10 things you currently want. Just 10. A new house, a relationship, more income, an ideal body, a vacation, or maybe just someone's approval. Write them all down, no judgment. Then after each item, ask, why? And after that answer, ask again, why? And again, until there's nothing left to peel back. For example, one of my clients once wrote, "I want a higher position at my company." I asked, why? He said, "Because I want respect." Why do you want respect? Because I don't feel good enough. Why do you think you're not good enough? He fell silent. Then after a moment, he whispered, "Because my father always told me I'd never amount to anything." In that moment, he realized what he truly needed wasn't a promotion. He needed acceptance, and not from his boss, but from himself. Many of your desires are not really desires. They're unhealed wounds. The Stoics believed that a person becomes truly strong when they can look at a desire and ask, "Is this something I chose? Or something choosing me?" And when you can remove the desires that don't belong to you, life becomes strangely lighter, not because you have less, but because you're no longer being pulled in every direction by things that don't nourish you. One technique I often suggest is called a day of wanting nothing. It sounds odd, but it's surprisingly effective. Choose one day and decide that today, you won't try to gain anything more, won't try to buy more, won't try to please anyone, won't try to prove anything. Just live with what you already have. Just use what's already within reach. When you do this, you'll realize that most of the things you think you need, you actually don't. There's a Stoic quote I really love. The richest person is not the one who has the most, but the one who needs the least. And it's true. When you need less, you become freer, steadier, harder to shake. You no longer live chasing a vague shadow. You live for what truly matters. The less you crave, the more you appreciate what's already here. And from that gratitude, life begins to blossom in a gentle yet profound way. And when you begin to put down the desires that were never truly yours, something interesting happens. Space opens up in your mind. You start to notice things that were always right in front of you, yet you never truly saw them. And in that very moment, gratitude, in the deepest sense of Stoic philosophy, begins to touch you. Not the shallow kind of gratitude you find in self-help books, but the kind that makes you sit still, take a long breath, and realize, I'm alive. And that alone is already beautiful. And this leads us to the second idea I want to explore with you. I want you to imagine this. Recall a morning from your life, any ordinary morning. You walked into your kitchen, reached for a cup, poured water or made coffee. Nothing special, but I want you to revisit that moment with different eyes, the eyes of someone practicing Stoic philosophy. You'll notice that so many small but precious things are happening at once. Your hands are still strong enough to hold a cup. Water still runs. Morning light filters through the window, laying a soft glow across the table. And the fact that you even have a kitchen, a roof to wake up under, that's something not everyone in this world has. But do you know what's funny? Most of us go through these moments while our minds are somewhere else, lost in yesterday's arguments, in goals we haven't reached, in tomorrow's worries. We live on autopilot, like machines, and because of that, we lose the most beautiful gift of all, the direct experience of our own life. Gratitude in Stoicism isn't about forcing yourself to be positive, or pretending everything is fine. No, it's simply about recognizing the beauty that's already here, even when life is imperfect. Especially when life is imperfect. I remember a patient of mine, a young woman around 30. She often felt she had nothing to be grateful for. Her job was stressful, her relationship was rocky, and her health was unstable. One day, I asked her to try a simple exercise. I said, write down 3 specific things you can be grateful for today. She looked at me as if I were asking something impossible, but eventually, she tried. And do you know what she wrote? I'm grateful the bus wasn't late this morning. I'm grateful a coworker brought me a coffee. I'm grateful I didn't have to eat dinner alone tonight. They were small things, but she burst into tears when she read them aloud, not because they were extraordinary, but because she hadn't allowed herself to notice things like that in a very long time. And that moment was when real gratitude began to take root in her. Neuroscientists in the US have shown that practicing gratitude can literally change the brain's activity, strengthening the regions associated with happiness and reducing the areas tied to anxiety. This isn't vague philosophy, it's science. But the Stoics went even further. They believed gratitude isn't only for the pleasant things, but also for difficulties, not because difficulties feel good, but because each challenge hides a lesson, and if we're alert enough, we can use it to become stronger. I remember a client of mine who lost his job unexpectedly. He was terrified, but a few weeks later, he told me, if I hadn't lost that job, I wouldn't have realized I was headed in the wrong direction. See, he wasn't grateful for losing his job. He was grateful for the truth that the event forced him to face. And when you practice gratitude in that way, gratitude for truth, for lessons, for the present moment, you become deeper with life. You stop seeing the world through the lens of lack and begin seeing it through the lens of abundance. And do you know what happens when you live through that lens? Everything starts to feel enough. Not perfect, but enough. I want you to try a small exercise tonight. Before you go to bed, find 3 very specific things to be grateful for. Don't write family. Don't write health. Don't write friends. Write something concrete. I'm grateful my son hugged me before I left for work. I'm grateful the afternoon sunlight looked beautiful on the wall. I'm grateful I had a kind conversation with someone today. Just one small thing is enough, so long as you feel it. And then, Observe what happens inside your heart. You'll feel a softness, a lightness, a quiet corner of peace, subtle but unmistakable. That is gratitude in the Stoic sense. And that softness will carry you to the next lesson. Because once your heart opens to see the good, it will also begin to see your inner waves more clearly. And that is when you learn one of the greatest powers of Stoic philosophy, the art of mastering your inner weather. When you begin nurturing gratitude every day, you'll notice something very important. Your heart becomes more sensitive, more refined. You start to notice what brings you joy, but you also start to clearly recognize what hurts you, drains you, or takes advantage of you. And in that very moment, you touch upon a deeply essential lesson in modern life, one that many Americans, especially those who live too much for others, often forget: the art of setting healthy boundaries. Let me tell you a true story. One of my patients, Laura, a gentle, kind woman who worked in customer service, was loved by everyone. She was the kind of person who always said, "Sure," always offered help, always tried to make others happy. But she was also someone who was constantly exhausted, constantly overwhelmed, constantly feeling taken advantage of, and she didn't understand why life felt so heavy on her shoulders. One day, during a session, I asked Laura, "Do you have any boundaries for yourself?" She looked at me, frowned slightly, and said, "What do you mean?" That's an answer I hear very often. Many people don't even know they have the right and the responsibility to set limits for their own lives. They think kindness means always saying yes. They think love means enduring everything. They think strength means carrying everything without complaint. But the Stoics didn't think that way. They taught that anyone who wants to maintain inner peace must protect their mental territory. Not by starting fights, but also not by letting others step over their lines just because they stayed silent. I want you to imagine this. You have a garden. A beautiful garden filled with precious things: your mind, your time, your energy, your values. If you don't build a fence, anyone walking by can step in, trample your flowers, pluck your leaves, take what matters to you. Not because they're malicious, simply because you never told them this space was private. That metaphor is boundaries. If you don't set them, others will, accidentally or intentionally, set them for you. Another patient of mine, a man working in tech, once told me he had no time for himself. But when we went through his schedule, every lack of time came from him constantly taking extra tasks, always answering calls after hours, always replying to emails at 11 p.m. because my boss expects it. So I asked him, "Does your boss expect it, or did you give your boss permission to expect it?" He fell silent. We often imagine boundaries as uncomfortable confrontations or heavy conversations. But in reality, boundaries begin with small things. Not answering calls after 8 p.m. Not checking email while having dinner with your family. Not agreeing to meet when you're truly exhausted. Not letting anyone speak to you disrespectfully. Not forcing yourself to be fine when you're not fine. The Stoics taught that you must master yourself before you can hope life will treat you kindly. And to master yourself, you must know what is mine and what is not mine. Boundaries are simply the answer to that question. But do you know why many people fear setting boundaries? Because they're afraid of disappointing someone, afraid of being disliked, afraid of being seen as selfish. But boundaries are not selfishness. Boundaries are self-respect. And the more you respect yourself, the more others respect you. One week, I asked Laura to practice something small. This week, say no once. Just once, but say it calmly, kindly, clearly. She said no when a coworker asked her to complete a report that wasn't part of her job. She told me her heart pounded, her hands went cold. But her coworker simply said, "Oh, Okay. She looked at me and laughed. Why did I imagine everything would go terribly when nothing happened at all? I said, because you haven't set boundaries for far too long. From that moment, Laura began setting more boundaries. Not extreme. Not angry. Not selfish. Just clear and kind. And her life changed. Not because the people around her changed, but because she changed the way she allowed people to treat her. I want you to try this exercise in the coming week. Identify 2 or 3 boundaries you need most right now. It could be about work hours. It could be about how people are allowed to speak to you. It could be about no longer taking responsibility for things that aren't yours. Then communicate those boundaries gently but firmly. You don't need to over-explain. You don't need to apologize. You just need to be clear. And then, watch what happens. Boundaries don't just protect you from harm. They protect your energy, your peace, your values, and the goals you're pursuing. And when you know how to protect your inner territory, you finally have the foundation to step into an even deeper skill. The ability to embrace voluntary discomfort. Voluntary discomfort. A practice that strengthens you from the inside out. And that is exactly where we're heading next. When you begin setting healthy boundaries for your life, the first thing you notice is you're no longer swept into as much chaos as before. But then something else becomes clearer. Even though you've reduced the number of people who drain you, even though you've stopped carrying responsibilities that aren't yours, the biggest storm still lives inside you. You can close the door, but you cannot hide from your own emotions. And that's when you need one of the core lessons of Stoic philosophy, one that anyone living in the modern world must learn if they don't want to be drowned by bad days: the art of mastering your inner weather. I want you to picture your heart and mind as a sky. Some days are light, warm, blue. Some days are filled with gray clouds, wind, and thunderstorms. And the interesting thing is, most of us live our whole lives without knowing how to steer our inner ship through those storms. We react on instinct. Someone says something offensive, right-pointing arrow, we explode with anger. A plan falls apart, right-pointing arrow, we panic immediately. Bad news arrives, right-pointing arrow, we sink right away. As if the weather outside controls the weather inside. As if we have no choice. As if emotions are our master. But the Stoics did not accept that. They taught that you cannot control the storm on the surface, but you can become the deep part of the ocean, always calm. Even when huge waves are crashing above. I remember a session with a patient named Jonathan, a software engineer. He told me that whenever something went wrong, he burst into anger instantly: traffic jams, urgent emails, coworkers asking too many questions, even his kid spilling a glass of water. He said, "I don't want to be like this, but it happens too fast. I can't control it." And that is the issue. Emotions come quickly, but we often forget that our reaction is still a choice. I told Jonathan, "You have 3 golden seconds. 3 seconds before you react." He asked, "What can 3 seconds do?" I smiled. "Those 3 seconds decide who you are. 3 seconds. 3 seconds to pause. 3 seconds to interrupt your old reflex. 3 seconds to close your eyes. Breathe deeply, and notice your body. Is your heart racing? Are your shoulders tight? Is your jaw clenched? 3 seconds to whisper to yourself, 'This is weather. It will pass. I am not this storm.'" Neuroscience shows it takes about 2 to 3 seconds for the limbic system, the instinctual emotional brain, to send signals to the prefrontal cortex, the rational part of the brain. If you pause for just those 2 to 3 seconds, you interrupt the automatic reaction that has controlled you for years. Jonathan began practicing. The next week he returned and said, "It works, but not every time." I said, "That's okay. No one controls the weather in one day. This is lifelong training. He told me that one day he was driving and the car behind him kept honking. His first instinct was to yell, to slam the steering wheel, to get angry. But he remembered the exercise. He paused, 3 seconds, one deep breath, and then he realized he was tired, stressed, hungry. The honking simply triggered emotions that were already inside him. The anger didn't come from the driver behind him. It came from within. And that's the turning point. When you realize emotions don't come from the event, but from your interpretation of the event, you begin to truly master your life. The Stoics always said, "No one makes you angry. Your thoughts about them make you angry." When you see everything as weather, you stop identifying with it. Anger is not you. Anxiety is not you. Sadness is not you. They are simply clouds passing through your sky. You are the sky, not the clouds. You are the deep ocean, not the waves. I often teach my patients a simple but incredibly powerful technique. When emotion rises, place your hand on your chest and say, "This emotion is here, but it does not control me." Then inhale slowly for 4 seconds. Hold for 2 seconds. Exhale for 6 seconds. Even one cycle shifts your nervous system. But to master your inner weather, you need repetition. You need to fail a few times. You need days when you slip. You need moments when you say something you regret. That isn't failure. It's training. The Stoics saw every off moment as a gym for the soul. Each emotional trigger is a chance to choose differently. You're not training yourself to stay calm. You're training yourself to be free. Free from unconscious reactions. Free from old patterns. Free from being dragged around by your emotions. And the most important part, your peace no longer depends on the weather outside. You don't need sunshine to feel calm. You don't need an easy life to feel grounded. You don't need others to be perfect to feel whole. You learn to become the person who can stand in the middle of a storm and still keep a quiet center within. And once you reach that point, you'll understand something profound. Peace is not the absence of storms. Peace is the ability to stand firm within them. And that ability to stand firm leads us to the next lesson, the art of voluntary discomfort, a practice that strengthens your inner core on an even deeper level. When you begin mastering your inner weather, you realize something important. Emotions may be strong, but they are not the enemy. What causes suffering is not emotion itself, but our inability to stay steady when emotion rises. And in that moment of realization, you understand a truth the Stoics knew thousands of years ago. Inner strength is not born from comfort. It comes from your ability to face difficulty without collapsing. And this is when we step into one of the deepest and most powerful practices in Stoicism, voluntary discomfort. I know the phrase, discomfort, makes many people instantly want to run away. We live in a society where comfort is treated almost like a basic right. Everything, from food, room temperature, entertainment, news, dopamine, can be delivered with a single tap. We don't like discomfort. We don't like lack. We don't like inconvenience. But it's precisely because we live wrapped in comfort that we've become weaker than we think. A man once told me, "I don't understand why my life feels so stressful, when I don't really lack anything." I looked at him and asked, "Do you ever allow yourself to be uncomfortable?" He replied, "Why would I do that?" I smiled. "Because you've forgotten how strong you actually are." That is what voluntary discomfort reminds us. You are stronger than you think. You can handle more than you believe. You are not as fragile as comfort has made you feel. The Stoics, especially Seneca, deliberately stepped into difficulty to remind themselves of this fundamental truth. You cannot control what life brings, but you can train yourself not to be shaken by it. He once wrote, Set aside a few days to live as the poor, eat little, dress simply, sleep on the floor, and ask yourself, is this what I have feared? Seneca didn't do this to punish himself. He did it to dismantle the illusion that we need everything to be okay in order to live. Have you ever noticed that in your darkest moments, job loss, heartbreak, illness, crisis, you somehow became stronger than you imagined? That's because deep inside you, in your human nature, there is always a reservoir of resilience. You just don't feel it when life is too easy. Let me tell you a short story about a client of mine named Marcus. He was young, intelligent, but often insecure, worried about the future, scared of failure. One day I suggested he try taking cold showers in the morning. He looked at me as if I were joking. But he tried. The next week he said, "It was really hard, but it made me feel stronger. When I can stand under freezing water for 2 minutes without running away. Suddenly the small problems of the day don't feel so frightening anymore." I told him, that's the point. When you walk into discomfort on purpose, discomfort no longer walks into you so easily. Voluntary discomfort is not self-torture. It's training your body and mind to speak a different language. I can withstand this. I don't break. I am stronger than my reflex to avoid difficulty. And you don't need to do extreme things. You don't need to climb snowy mountains like Wim Hof. You don't need to walk barefoot on burning coals. You just need small, intentional practices. A 30-second cold shower. Skipping breakfast once. Turning off social media for a day. Walking instead of driving. Sleeping without heating for one night. Or simply letting yourself feel hungry for a moment before eating. The difficulty level doesn't matter. The intention does. It is the act of stepping into discomfort consciously that builds inner strength. I once asked a patient, "Do you notice that every time a doctor gives you concerning test results, you panic? Or when your bank balance drops a bit, you react as if the world is collapsing?" He said yes. I told him, that's because you've never sat with discomfort. You think you can't handle it. But you can. You just haven't tried. Voluntary discomfort is essentially a process of meeting yourself. You stop running from discomfort. You face it. You stand with it. You learn that it is simply a sensation, not a verdict. One question I often ask patients during this practice is this discomfort actually dangerous? Or does it just feel uncomfortable because you're not used to it? Most answer, it's just unfamiliar. And from there, they start to fear life less. They become less shaken by challenges. Less stressed over small things. Less panicked by unexpected changes. When you know you can stand firm in discomfort you choose, you begin to trust that you can stand firm in discomfort you don't choose. This is what the Stoics called resilience. And here's something interesting. When you reduce your dependence on comfort, you begin to appreciate the small things again. A warm meal tastes richer. A soft bed feels precious. An ordinary day becomes beautiful. And this strength, the ability to endure difficulty while still appreciating beauty, leads us to the next lesson, the art of service and giving. Because when you know you are strong enough, you begin to realize you also have the capacity to lift others. And that is where we are heading next.